What's that group of players have in common? They are all appearing as first-time eligible players on this year's Hall of Fame ballot. It is, without question, the most controversial class of first-time Hall of Fame eligible players ever. Bonds, Sosa, Piazza, Biggio, Schilling, Clemens. You know about all the whispers, you know about all the allegations, and you know that Hall of Fame voters are going to have a pickle of a time trying to sift through all the nonsense to figure out who gets to Cooperstown. Harold Reynolds, Matt Vasgersian back with Ken Rosenthal and Sam Ryan. And our next guest came out with a column yesterday in the Boston Globe that caught a lot of people's attention. Pete Abraham covers the Red Sox for the Globe. He had said previously, as a Hall of Fame voter, that where there's a whisper, there's not a vote. In other words, if there's any innuendo, any implication of performance-enhancing drug use, I'm out. Yesterday, Pete completely changed his stance and said, listen, I don't care anymore, effectively. And I don't want to put too many words in Pete's mouth because we have him on the line. Pete, welcome. Good morning to you. Thanks for the phone call. Talk about your change of position here in terms of the Hall of Fame eligibility.
Well, there were two things, guys, that changed my mind about this. But the first part of it is that the Hall of Fame is a museum, and it's supposed to reflect what's happened in the game over the years and be a place where people can learn about the game. And the steroid era was a blight on baseball. There's no question about that. But it was something that happened in baseball, and these guys played during this time in baseball. So I don't know how you can vote for guys who represent that era and just ignore anybody who might be tainted by steroid use or some kind of drug use. And the other part of it that was a trouble for me as I was voting the last couple of years is you don't get a list of here are the players who were tainted by drugs, here's the times they used them, here's how it affected their play. You're just basically told to figure it out for yourself. Well, I can't figure it out for myself. I have suspicions about some guys. There are some guys who have admitted it. There are some guys who haven't said anything, haven't been tied to anything, but certainly looked the part of somebody who might have been using drugs. And I'm just not comfortable with the idea of trying to be the judge, jury, and executioner in these cases without knowing all the facts. So to me, the only fair thing to do is to judge everybody in the context of this era and what happened, and pick the guys who you think best represent that era of time in baseball.
It's a fascinating take. This is opening up such a great discussion. Even internally, Pete, your column yesterday, we kicked it around the building all day yesterday.
Yeah, we had a lot of comments on it. A lot of people have emailed me, and I'd say it's probably 50-50 in terms of what people think about it. And I think it's easy to say, okay, well, we shouldn't have anybody in the Hall of Fame who cheated. Well, the thing is, we already have people in the Hall of Fame who did, and there's probably players in the Hall of Fame who have done some kind of performance-enhancing drugs that we just don't know about. And I think the other part of it is that it was a time in baseball where everybody involved in the game, management, owners, the Players Association, the media, everybody kind of looked the other way for a long time. And all these home runs were flying out of parks, and everybody said, oh, that's great, but we're not going to ask too many questions about it. So I don't know how that can happen, and then retroactively we're going to go back and say, okay, well, now we're going to start punishing these guys who did this, even though at the time nobody really stood up to it or said anything about it. I don't know that it's right to put the BBWA in the position of having to be the people who figure out who needs to get punished for this. And the other part of it that I can't figure out either is, look, if you believe what we've heard, there are certain players who were clean for a fair amount of their careers. They might have done something later on in their careers. How do you judge those guys? Because I think Roger Clemens was a Hall of Famer just based on what he did for the Red Sox. Now, do you look at what might have happened when he was with the Blue Jays and say, well, I can't vote for him now? I just don't know what the line is. How much is too much?
Hey, Pete, it's Harold here. You said a lot of things that I'm curious about. One, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, what was the change of heart? Was there one moment that made you have the change of heart and change of mind with this? I know you've talked about not feeling like you should be judge and jury. The other one that comes to mind for me was the comment you made about maybe they were Hall of Famer before, maybe they did something or not. And I look at Pete Rose, Pete Rose, as a player, got 4,256 hits. He's not in. But as a manager, he was betting on baseball, so he's not in the Hall of Fame. I'm just, it's tough to look at all those different scenarios. I'm curious your thoughts on what I just said.
Well, with Pete Rose, he's not on the ballot, so it's not like I have a choice to make on that. He's been banned from baseball, and part of that's not being on the Hall of Fame ballot. all of the rest of these guys are on the Hall of Fame ballot. There's no addendum when you get the ballot that says, hey, by the way, these guys, were tainted by drugs. These players are on the ballot just like anybody else. They were never suspended by baseball. They were never punished by baseball. And as far as Major League Baseball is concerned, there's nothing to keep them from being eligible. And in terms of having a change of heart, Harold, I think the Lance Armstrong situation had a lot to do with it for me. Even though he has nothing to do with baseball, this was a guy for years and years claimed he was innocent, never failed the drug test. He swore that he would go after anybody who thought any differently, and it turned out that he was guilty. And so I don't know how that you can say, well, okay, Barry Bonds is guilty, but these other players aren't. And then so what happens in 3 or 4 years when we find out that maybe some other player did do something? Are we supposed to retroactively go back and say, okay, well, now you can't be in the Hall of Fame? I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't know that you can just on your own suspicion or on your own, some media reports from years ago, decide this guy's okay and this other guy's not.
Hey, Pete, it's Ken. Great column. And as a fellow Hall of Fame voter, I agree with a lot of what you said. But I have problems with it, too. And basically, the problems are these. One, we are the judge and jury. We're the people who have the vote, and there is a character clause that is in the criteria that we are allowed to use subjectively to make determinations about players who aren't necessarily entitled to the Hall of Fame. This is an honor. And the other thing, this is what I want to ask you about. The problem I have, Peter, is that if you elect players who have used, what are you saying to the players who were clean? It seems to me it's a disservice to them, and I'm wondering what you think about that aspect of this.
Well, I go back to the idea that the Hall of Fame is a museum and it's supposed to reflect what happened in the game. I don't know that the Hall of Fame is a Hall of Fame of moral uprightness, so I think that's a kind of a cloudy situation. I mean, that character clause was written largely by guys who kept black people out of baseball for years and years and fought to do that. So I think the character thing is very cloudy, too. And in terms of clean players, that's clearly a problem. But I think you also have to look back at the times, and I don't remember anybody standing up in the Players Association and saying, we have to do something about this. This is wrong. I'm going to start calling out my fellow players. I think even the guys who were clean largely looked the other way. I mean, I don't remember any players standing up and saying, hey, we need to, why are we going after Barry Bonds? And why aren't we saying more about Rafael Palmeiro? I mean, the players fought for years to not have drug testing. So I don't know that there was anybody who, as a player, was standing up to this at the time and fighting against it. I mean, everybody, I think, including the players, looked the other way.
Pete Abraham with the Boston Globe with a well-spoken, a well-defended rebuttal, I guess, to the rebuttal for his piece yesterday.
He's thought it through.
Yeah,
he thought this through pretty good.
Pete, this is the only thing in your methodology I take exception to. Maybe it's the Boston in you, but if you're going to vote for Clemens for the Hall of Fame just based on his Boston body of work, that's 192 wins. I don't know that I would agree with you. I agree with everything you said except for that. So I guess you're batting like 500 in my book.
Well, the thing about Clemens, it was more to the point of how do you judge what a player did for a certain amount of time compared to what he might have done later in his career. And, I think that you could make that case with Bonds, too. I mean, Bonds did a lot of things before he got to the Giants where you could say, well, he clearly was a Hall of Famer. He was one of the great players of his time. And so I think it's more to that point in that how do you decide where that line is? That well, this guy, what he did was he was a Hall of Fame caliber player before he might have got, involved in the drug situation. Does that, once he did get involved, does that exclude him from the Hall? And I don't know. It's just, to me, it's a really difficult thing to ask you to figure out because there are certain players on the ballot this year who I know for a fact that people have suspicions about, but nothing's ever been tied to them directly. Now, how do you treat those guys? Do you just say, well, I'm suspicious, so I'm not going to vote for them? I mean, I don't think that's fair either.
Well, Pete, last thing for me, and the only thing I have a big problem with the Hall of Fame. I always looked at it like this is where the greatest are, not necessarily a museum. And I have a hard time with guys that, in my mind, cheated to be better than everybody else. This is not a natural ability. I don't care how good you were. The great thing about baseball is the longevity in it, where you're able to do it over time clean. And I just have a hard time with that. And I think, and this is my opinion, you're welcome to speak back here in a second, but I just feel like it's not a museum. It's supposed to be a place of the greatest players that we're able to achieve. And I think these guys basically said, forget the Hall of Fame, I'm looking for money. And I have a hard time with that subject. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see that side of it, and that was something that I wrestled with. But I think when you look at the history of baseball, I mean, the amphetamines were pretty common in the game for a long time. And I'm sure there were players in the Hall of Fame now who used amphetamines to some degree. Maybe that helped them play a day game after a night game or helped them when they were injured or something like that. There's a lot of cloudy things.
I follow you. I clearly get.
And I think you guys have both.
From.
I think Pete's coming from the stance where it's a museum. Let's just put people in who indicate how the game was played then. Yours is more of a reward of merit. So I think those are two really well-spoken points. Pete, wish we had more time with you, but thanks very much for the time. And you can read Pete's work on online, bostonglobe.com. Pete, thanks very much.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. Anytime.